Namaste, welcome to season 3, episode
18.
of TT Talks. My name is Suhaas, and today we have a special guest.
Yes, my name is Deven Patel. I'm a professor at the University of Pennsylvania.
And so, Dr. Patel, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what you particularly study.
Sure. Well, basically, I consider myself a student and a scholar of classical humanities of early India. So basically, everything connected with initially the Sanskrit language. I was trained as a philologist at the University of California at Berkeley, where I did my graduate work. As an undergraduate, I did English and comparative literature, as well as Sanskrit, so I kind of had that initial thing. And a philologist is somebody who basically has to be able to read a language, and particularly an ancient language usually, but other languages as well, medieval, modern languages, and be able to not only read everything in that literature, in that language, but also to contextualize it in its particular time and how it kind of functioned in the society of that period, etc. So basically, that was my training. So I teach courses in literature, I teach courses in philosophy and mythology, all related to early India.
Gotcha. And so, how did you know at a young age this is the field you want to go into specifically?
I did not know this at a young age. And in fact, to be honest, I had no real ambitions, or let's just say realistic. I had ambitions, but no realistic sense that I would end up where I ended up. I was very good at languages in terms of, as many second generation Americans whose parents come from abroad. Somehow, we're caught between these two worlds we're almost naturally bilingual because our parents are more comfortable in their home language. And then so you become bilingual, you're more attuned to language of the new place and people outside of the house. So I was good at spelling, and and for some reason I was also good at, reading and writing, and I was really interested in literature. So I thought, okay, you know what, this is where my strength is. And I wasn't as comfortable or as good, let's just say, in mathematics, even though I excelled enough to get through, but it wasn't something that was a passion project for me. So I kind of was in that direction. So I thought, okay, naturally in college, I'll major in English and comparative literature, or English literature. And then I did that. And on the side, I studied Sanskrit, which was offered at Columbia University and I thought it was my second language. It was like a language requirement almost. But also, as a child, I had kind of grown in an environment where I was exposed to, particularly, both my parents come from, Hindu families in India, and I was very much accustomed to some of the cultural things, even though they weren't academics and they weren't really scholars, or they weren't really even talking to me about any of these things, just osmosis. So I kind of had a little bit of interest in that direction. And I thought, this was a way for me to learn about myself, learn new things, etc. So it just went in that direction. And then gradually, I can tell you a whole story, but I'll stop here. I have a whole story of how I ended up in graduate school and then how I ended up getting jobs. So I'll be happy to tell you more about that. But that's kind of how it started at a young age. There was no real direction immediately, as a young person.
So you kind of just played it with your strengths and kind of saw where that took you, pretty much.
Absolutely. Obviously when this is still the case, right? When somebody goes to study humanities, the one pragmatic thing that parents always think about is because they're worried about their kids studying things that aren't going to be financially viable in the real world. So they worry about the person can go to law school. Yeah. Right. So I thought about law school or things of that sort, but I realized right after, when I was a junior, senior in college, that that didn't seem like something that was pulling me. So
Gotcha.
I had to find some other direction.
So in your kind of journey of kind of reaching where you are now, what are some major challenges that you kind of experienced?
Well, there's a lot of challenges, right? The first challenge, of course, is just working in a space that is, not part it's sort of a little bit outside or just sort of marginally, it feels associated with the broader economic currents of the world, right? So it's not like engineering or medicine or law or any of those subjects which business, any of those subjects which are there's a lot of opportunities for a lot of people. You're always challenged because you have to differentiate yourself. You have to excel in what you do. You have to have a lot of luck in terms of you have to have a lot of soft skills as well. You have to be able to communicate.
Yeah.
So those are all not very they're not airtight or they don't guarantee success in any particular way, right? It's not like you can just work hard in one direction and you'll succeed, So that was one thing. The second thing was in this particular area, when I was, coming up, there were very few role models. In fact, I am among the very few of the first, second generation scholars, if you will, students who decided to, dip their toes into the world of academics, particularly humanities. There were more people who did science or medicine or other engineering professors, and many of them were foreign born, right? Many of them come from India itself or Pakistan or wherever, South Asia, but very few second generation, and especially studying India. Early India, right? Yeah. Because that was a kind of an enclave that was for a certain tradition of, they're mostly people from the ever since these subjects were taught in America and in Europe, but they were, and it was, part of also the mentality of colonialism, the whole kind of, the residue of that world, right? Where you have, very, rarely do people who identify with a particular culture teach that culture. And that's a new thing. I mean, now there's many more people who do that, but it was, and I never really even thought about it much, to be honest. At that time, I was just, passionate and into what I do. And even now I have a little bit of difficulty relating to that aspect of it. Like, at least I have difficulty articulating what it might mean to represent an identity. I think second generation people are always, they're transnational on some level, like just naturally. So they kind of see themselves as outside of identities. Yeah. Although they can't help but to be drawn into, and they kind of have identity crises, right? This is the thing.
Yes. So. Gotcha. How do you recommend, like let's say the third generation of Indo-South Asian Americans to kind of remove the stigma associated with pursuing humanities rather than STEM?
Well, listen, I think the stigma, I advise a lot of undergraduates in my current capacity. I work with the comparative literature department, the South Asia Studies department. And, obviously all of those people are going, the majority of them are drawn towards the humanities or the social sciences. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that I always say, and this is just from my own experience, which might be, of course, flawed and just idiosyncratic, and it's just applied to me, and it might not apply to everybody all the time, but is that generally, if you are really, once you identify for yourself, like what is it that really drives me, and what is it in your gut that kind of makes you happy, mm-hmm. In terms of, labor. I mean, you're going to have to work hard. There's no way out of it. And you might have to even work harder if you do something different. But if it's something which is kind of flowing out of you, mm-hmm. then I almost have say that you have to have faith that will lead you to be successful in whatever it is. And, also part of it is, you have to figure out what you want, because some people, I always say, if you're really interested in having, a certain kind of lifestyle, mm-hmm. right. Or you have a certain kind of, inkling towards that will make you happy, is to be secure, stable in a particular way, then you have to pursue that. Like you can't pretend to want to be a
Yeah.
humanist or some scientist and still have harbor other ambitions. So, but if you kind of feel like you are tending in a certain direction, then you have to do your homework, but then just have faith that your energy will take you into the right direction, so you'll be able to find this place for yourself in the world, doing humanity, social sciences. But I know it's not for everybody.
And I think that's because there's a lot of pressure from like parents or like just people in general of trying to pursue these two specific STEM professions. So a lot of people are like able to financially or even personally able to pursue what they actually want to pursue.
That's very true. To be honest, and I always say this, is that, look, I was blessed. I mean, both of my parents, when they came, they were, I mean, I had an older sibling who, my parents pushed towards medicine, and he became a doctor. And, it was something that he wasn't at first really into. He wanted to go into something else, business maybe. But with me, I was always a good student. They kind of left me alone and just thought, okay, well, you'll figure it out. And, so it was one of those things where my parents were very supportive, if you will, on some level, but also, or just not unsupportive, let's say.
Yeah.
And second thing was, we have to understand that many people who go into the humanities, social sciences are often they're often blessed. Now, I'm not saying that they're from privileged backgrounds, because, we were by no means privileged as a first generation, and also just sort of just scraping by, as first generation immigrants, my parents. But I didn't have any debt in terms of like, I didn't have to take care of my family as a child, right? I came from a stable home in that way. And even after college, I worked before I went to graduate school, and I paid off all my debts, my college debts, So I kind of had a little bit of freedom in that way to pursue certain things. And now I understand many people don't have that, right?
Yeah.
Many people come from where they have to get into financially viable positions immediately to support their families, to support themselves. So there's always a little bit of that kind of privilege, if you will, that goes into pursuing certain things.
Yeah, I mean, not a lot of people are given the opportunity to pursue what they actually want to pursue when it comes to anything, right?
Yeah. I mean, we're bound. But you know what? I also feel like sometimes we don't even when we can do it.
Yeah.
We're not. There's a lot of voices that dissuade us from doing it. And that's why I would say, and of course, look, the terrain has changed. What the humanities, I mean, in the old days, or, I sound like an old man, but like, before the internet and before computers, the university was the one place where you went to learn and to teach and to study and to have the kind of environment, right?
Yeah.
And that world's changed somewhat now, right? There's access to the things that would satisfy your passions that you don't need the universities for necessarily.
Yeah.
Of course, it is still a great place. It's still an important place to pursue those things, and it's important that they exist. But, at that time, that was the only game in town, and so pursuing that required a little bit of, you have to just go for it, and then just be okay with having plan B and plan C and falling back on things, and just, making a living and living in the world. Nowadays, I think there are, for people who do have an inkling towards the humanities and social sciences and languages and cultures, if they have enough energy and initiative, you can pursue those things outside of the university as well, which is a very liberating thing on some level, for a lot of people.
So in the courses that you currently teach at UPenn, do you see a lot of the students being of like Indian, South Asian descent, or kind of individuals that are more interested in learning about the culture as like on a fresh scale?
Well, it's usually a mix, right? There's definitely many students who come, to in the same position that I went into these classes. Several generations ago, which was, I really wanted to learn about something which I knew something about, but not everything about, not a lot about in many cases. And, I wanted to learn from people who kind of were teaching it with some experience, with some knowledge, etc. So that is a big chunk of people who come into these classes. So I teach, especially in my mythology class, Hindu mythology. There's a lot of interest in learning about the stories and the various kinds of traditional aspects of religion, culture, and philosophy. Less so, but still, philosophy also, you see people in literature, people coming to learn about those aspects of the tradition. And then there's another group of people who are, obviously these subjects, in my opinion, sell themselves, right? They're so popular because they have demonstrated sort of great humanistic value globally. So many people who aren't born into these cultural traditions come because they want to learn about these cultures, which they've heard a lot about, and then there's some, of course, who, come because these are, they have to take a general education class, right? So, and I suppose they get drawn to one class or the other, and so some of them come to my class. It's always a mixed bag,
Yeah. So kind of changing topics from that. So like as a scholar in this field, do you have any opinions about the way currently like South Asian culture, Indian culture is being expressed in media now, in all forms of media?
Well, it's very difficult to say for me. I mean, I do certainly sense a lot of forces at work from all kinds of angles, right? And many of them are recognizable from previous generations. But you've always had, whenever you put anything under a microscope, that's not stable or static. It's always going to, the eye of the beholder, right? They're always going to see things in it which are what they want to see. So it's always been that way on some level, right? When you've always had scholars studying the subjects, whether from all the different disciplines, and seeing things in a certain way. It used to be a kind of, but academics in general have changed with studying all the subjects. So now I've noticed that there's, obviously there's more, many more people have come from South Asia itself in America, in American academia, much more than before. And the connections between South Asia and what's outside of South Asia have grown more symbiotic now. In other words, whatever was happening in India, say, was studied, but there was always, you studied it differently abroad. You studied it for your own purposes, right? Some people here studied, they studied South Asia, but it wasn't like they were involved with South Asian politics or cultural life in a deep, deep way where they were, because there was also communication was not as available. So there was a little bit more isolation in studying these things, and also a lot of these scholars could study things without the input of South Asians, right? So now both of those things have changed. So that's changed the whole terrain. And I think not necessarily always for the better. Like on some level, I do think it is better that, there's more communication and there's more input and people have to be more sensitive and aware of what they're teaching, who they're teaching it to, et cetera, et cetera. That's all very important. Downside is that, intellectual life on some level or academic life on some level also thrives when it is unperturbed by certain types of inquiries, right? If you're studying certain things, you need energy and time to study it in a deep, invested way. And I think now when we have so many voices, so many things that you have to be aware of all at once, it kind of dilutes and diminishes some of the product of the scholarly inquiries, and so that I don't think is necessarily a good thing, and you have to really be disciplined as a scholar to not get too caught up sometimes with the currents that are happening in the world, right? That are not even academic or in some level scholarly, but are more political, really, to be honest.
Gotcha. So you're kind of saying, for a scholar in their mindset, they shouldn't really be affected by the political situation of what's going on?
Well, I don't want to go that far because obviously for some people that has become the focus of their scholastic inquiry. So I don't want to diminish that that avenue for those
Yeah.
who want to do that kind of thing, But there has to be also spaces for those people for whose work should not be so heavily, that they're not actually out to study politics, right? It's not an object of their study,
Mm-hmm.
nor is it but nobody can really be immune,
Yeah.
as you know. In this day and age, has become so pronounced.
Yeah.
But you can't really be immune from political currents. And for those people who wish to engage, then that's something which is admirable on some level,
Yeah.
and they should. And I think there should also be a space for those who who don't feel as comfortable to engage in that way.
Gotcha. And does this same thing kind of apply to like TV shows or like movies that are South Asian as well?
Yeah, that's been really interesting. I mean, on some level, I think there's been a lot of, in my eyes, progress on that front because, there used to be that there was only a certain, obviously when you have a very unknown small minority,
Yeah.
all kinds of impressions. And also, there's very few people that push back on things. So there was always kinds of some very negative things. And usually, and even positive things were often, there was a sense of still being marginalized and outsiderish, And I think it's a lot of people have done a lot of things in that realm that have at least added more texture and to the identity, right? The South Asian identity, even though obviously some of those things still continue where, there's, a sort of humor is used often to discipline communities, right? Like you make fun of them so that they kind of assimilate, or they kind of are more willing to let go of their, and that's something, it's usually there's some kind of bullying or humor or kind of dark humor or something. And these are strategies that I think people study culturally, right? The sociologists will study how communities, especially vulnerable communities, are often disciplined. And the media, unfortunately, has a role in that too, right? You can write any kind of story to just basically vilify or do a hatchet job on some particular community. And then people just eat it up. So I think it's very important to become critical of the media, to be honest. I think you should be very careful. And especially when you see a kind of a dark energy in that, just see it for what it is, just as much as, we're always trained to not see things too positively either.
Gotcha. So how do you recommend people who are in that field to kind of find a balance in that factor?
Yeah, well, the balance lies in I mean, first of all, I think, and this is something which is thankfully growing even amongst South Asians, is that there needs to be more confidence among themselves to feel that they are not beholden to adapt to somebody else's ideas and vision necessarily, right? I mean, it's of course it's always important to be amenable to new ideas and open, and that's what the scientific and intellectual spirit has to be about. You have to be willing to change your perspectives, but you shouldn't be doing it out of weakness of kind of mind, and I feel like that's the problem. And so the balance really lies in in pushing back when there needs to be some pushback. And also, working, also recognizing your own hang-ups or prejudices or biases, right? It always goes back. It goes both ways. But the balance. But there needs to be a balance struck among people, because I know that it's difficult being one or two people in a community of 10 or 20 people. It's hard to do.
Exactly. I was filling out some form the other day, and I think it said something about if you're a minority, you're allowed to apply for this or something. And it's now it's gotten to the point where it's Asians or people from South Asia aren't even considered a minority anymore, because there's just so many of them who've immigrated to the US. But I feel on a socio basis, we're still considered a minority. So what's the kind of dilemma of how to be more representative in the political or cultural aspects of the diaspora? or like how to be more present or more expressive?
Yeah, I wish I knew. I wish I had a better answer than. I mean, I'm torn about these things because it's quite true, and I think most of it is very unfair because it looks at Asian communities and not just South Asian, of course.
Yeah.
You know, Asian. Of course, it always goes in weird ways of what Asian means. Right?
Yeah.
Asian often thinks that people think of East Asia and South and all these things, and you don't realize that that these are not. Um, monolithic communities,
Mm-hmm.
and that there are many people with so many varied experiences, and you can't. And it's a shame, right? This is one of those things where I think something that starts with good intentions,
Yeah.
which is the intentions are to, and maybe it made sense several decades ago,
Yeah.
to almost look at things in a more static way, just to kind of change the way things looked, right, in boardrooms and classrooms and in government. And I think it's very important on some level. And now it's sort of become where some of those static ideas have not morphed and changed. At some level, there's larger issues there, of course, of, just how to negotiate and manage diversity in social life. But some of it, I think, is South Asians really need to, I think, just like everybody in the world, it's like the famous thing from Ralph Waldo Emerson that, build a better mousetrap and the world will be the path to your door. And you just have to just keep having faith in doing your labor and not expecting to be given any preferential treatment, but in fact probably be given non-preferential treatment where you almost have to like kick your way through the door by being too good. It's a real problem. It's a real problem, and I know it's very frustrating for many people.
Yeah.
Who don't know whether they're a minority or not a minority, or who decides that, right?
Yeah.
Right? Or why is one group that you feel like is definitely not a minority given minority status, and somebody who's it's tricky business.
It is. So let's say a student came up to you after class and was like, "What is the whole point of learning Sanskrit? Like, why is it relevant to the contemporary world?" What would you say to them?
Well, I don't know if look, one of my current projects is looking at contemporary Sanskrit literature. So I am interested in the contemporary period of Sanskrit, but that's not the reason why you would study it, obviously, or that many people would be interested in studying it. I think that, one of my former colleagues here, he teaches elsewhere now in America. He used to tell his students that you can do no more radical an act or revolutionary an act than to study a non-modern, non-Western language. That's kind of, Sanskrit sort of falls into that space. But look, part of it was, Sanskrit is something which is uniquely, it's one of, obviously it's one of the oldest, if not the oldest, continuous languages, right? For which we have a long history, a long literature, a long cultural tradition.
Yeah.
And so just for the very fact that it's survived, and it's something which has fired up the imaginations, and it's been studied by people from Central Asia and East Asia and Southeast Asia and Europe and America.
Yeah.
It's truly a world subject, right? It's something, and there's things in it. Why are there chairs in Europe and America that teach Sanskrit? Because, largely because of the discovery of its linguistic heritage, right? People studied Panini and all the language traditions and comparative historical linguistics really had its beginning with the discovery of India, right? Philosophically, it's been magically important for transforming many people's lives, right? The philosophies that came out of India, and also just the cultural tradition. So Sanskrit has a big role in global human history.
Okay.
That's one thing. It's a continuously living tradition, and also it's really, if you study the grammar and if you study it, it's one of those things like people find beauty in mathematics, right? They find beauty in learning. Sanskrit grammar is one of the great monuments of human civilization. It's the way it was studied and the way you can learn it. It's order, it's perfection, it's beauty is really something which I think would be very attractive to a lot of people who aren't necessarily just doing it for the sake of, well, it's like usefulness. But, math is not really useful on some level.
Yeah.
It can be applied and useful, but,
Yeah.
sometimes when you study the language, and if you're interested in the literature of the language, studying it in the language itself has enormous impact on transforming your life. Just like, math can be applied to be viable in many occupations and becomes useful knowledge. Sanskrit can also be useful in transforming your own life, I think. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's very valuable to, if you have an inkling to learn it. Now, you can still do that stuff without learning Sanskrit. It's not like Sanskrit is like the only way.
Yeah.
But if it is a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's good to learn any language. Any language gives you a window into that world.
Exactly.
The world behind the Sanskrit window is magnificent.
Yeah.
So
So how would you kind of propose like universities? Like for example, Georgia Tech, where I go, they don't offer any Sanskrit courses, and I don't think any of the universities in Georgia offer it at all. So how would you convince these universities to offer them?
Look, unfortunately, it's not just Sanskrit, right? I think most universities are moving away from even offering or teaching languages or even emphasizing the teaching of languages anymore. And, of course, America was famously described as a graveyard of languages. So after the first generation, the second and third generations usually don't even know their own language, right? So America is peculiar in that way, where language there is sort of a need to learn languages and for people to retain their languages and cultures, but it's kind of a force that it's almost you have to do some weird kind of necromancy and speak with the dead and revive these graveyards, right? But it's tricky, and so while where other languages are being kind of cut, which are thought to be more significant, it's hard to make an argument for Sanskrit in many of these languages, these universities. But I think that, I think language needs to be taken out of the world of necessarily useful knowledge. That's the problem. Language, by that logic, there would be no reason to study anything really. Yeah. Besides just something that's going to get you a job. Why study anything? Yeah. In a way, it kind of strikes at the very heart of the university's mission. Yeah. So I think there needs to be an argument made that, look, if you can find an instructor who's willing to do it, the university can, shake its seat cushions and get a few nickels to hire even an adjunct teacher of certain languages, Mm-hmm. And so I think that's something which can be encouraged. Maybe some small fundraising efforts, and this is something which I've encouraged and I continue to encourage. Rather than kind of just you can start seeding small positions. Yeah. Many universities where you'll have somebody teaching, who's an expert in language, who can teach. You can't now. Of course, some place like South Asia, when you have 25, 20, 28, 30 official languages, and each language is a whole culture. Yeah. You're a student of Telugu, and students of Telugu and Tamil who are kind of, those are huge traditions. Those are huge traditions in their own right. Even my mother language, Gujarati, has about 50 million speakers globally, which is like a huge number. It's like a drop in the bucket for India, but it's a huge number. So it's like, I think that if you can locate an instructor and then convince the administration to bring somebody on and then do some fundraising efforts, I'm sure maybe universities would be happy to involve community members for some. And language is often less controversial. Yeah. You have a lot of, politics enters into the fray when you want to seed professorships, but you think language wouldn't be such a problem.
So, thinking about all of this, how would you kind of convince or help someone who's kind of hesitant of expressing their culture to kind of be proud of expressing it? Or someone who's hesitant, has this interest but is hesitant to kind of showcase and pursue it.
Ironically, I think people who are people of your generation now and going forward are probably going to have it easier than people like myself. People like myself are always caught in this, world of being embarrassed about their culture, and also quietly very learned and proud about it, because both of our parents were usually, heavily into one cultural tradition, the one that they were born and raised into, and many of them were also still kind of adapting. So we were caught in a real bind where, we really wanted to go deeper and express ourselves, but we're also less able to, or had more roadblocks. And I feel like now there's more of a encouragement to be proud of your cultural identity, and not necessarily proud in a way where, I think real pride comes from a real sense of knowing oneself for who you really are. And that includes good and bad things, and really just being okay with it, saying, listen, we're just like everybody else in that way. And there's a lot of good from our traditions that we want to share with the globe. There has to be that mentality that you want to bring the best of your worlds into other people's worlds. Just as you're more inclined to accept the best of other people, And I think that mentality has to be across the globe, and that's the problem. I think many people are very, narrow-minded, and they often think that other people are worse than they are, right? And so we have to change them. We have to, this is the very spirit of that colonial mentality, right? That we have to bring civilization to other people, and I think that sense is also not good. But the other side of it is very bad, where you actually feel like you let other people decide your, make the, sort of shape and condition your view of yourself, which is the worst thing you can do ever, right? You have to have that sense of confidence, and I don't know how to. Language is a big way. I mean, what you're doing is great with your project, because once you can speak your own language, which is a window into your own world, and you can live in it, then you're fine. Then you're stable. I think when you're beholden to other people's views or studying yourself through other lenses, you're at a disadvantage.
So I was looking into your kind of publications and everything. So could you kind of elaborate on kind of your text to tradition?
Sure.
Yeah.
Listen, most of my stuff, my academic work has been passion projects. I kind of started, I had questions, and then, you answer those questions. Or the other works that I've done recently, a couple of them have been co-written with, people with scholar who I, just out of friendship or just out of kind of learning, cross-learning, right? So there's always some particular reason why a particular work gets written. And so text to tradition came out of a question of how did a work which a tradition calls a classic, how did it get to me? There has to be a history. It didn't just sort of magically arrive, And we had stories for that for other traditions. We had we have kind of history books about Chaucer and Dante and all these other great global classics, right? Homer. But we had nothing for Sanskrit. We had nothing for Indian texts. I mean, we had, people had worked on the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, of course, these two great works, But other works that were kind of invisible. And yet there was all this talk about, and then there was modern criticism, which spoke about, this is a horrible work. I don't know how this is better. And then the traditional people were like, this is the best work ever written. So that kind of set me off trying to figure out what was going on. So that whole book is really about the last of the traditional 5 great classic poems of Sanskrit, which the tradition itself defined at some point, right? Which is also has its own history. And I just traced it in various ways in which how it got to us. So I looked at commentary writing, and I looked at translation adaptations, various stories written about it, various kinds of, just basically
Yeah.
like showing how a text gradually becomes a whole tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it basically was. So that's kind of where my research took me, and for that particular book.
Gotcha. So these are all passion projects for you. What do you see yourself wanting to pursue into the future?
Yeah. Well, like I said, part of it is also, you have to be interested in something,
Mm-hmm.
and interests change, people change on some level. So, I kind of do want to keep going with the thing that I've started, that I've sort of established a little bit of my own kind of stamp on this world of academics. And that's, I work on this genre known as the Mahakavya, which is like these very difficult but great poems from traditions that are often, you have to know the language very well to appreciate them. You have to really be into the culture. So that's why it was natural. So it was a natural attraction for me to get into those kinds of works. So I want to continue doing work in that area, no doubt. I've also dipped into doing work with grammar and language. I did something on Telugu and Kannada with another professor, even though I don't know those languages very well, or in Kannada's case at all. But I, kind of when you work together with a professor, you can there was kind of a special kind of scholastic project where we could pool our collective energies to produce a work. So that kind of projects are always fun and important to do, to maintain a kind of camaraderie and things of that sort. But I also, I'm looking to maybe do something that would be more general. Like I'm looking to do more translation projects that can like convey for ordinary people as well as for scholars some of the great works of South Asia, of classical India, and also bring in the contemporary a little bit more. So there's a lot of things that are there, but some of it we just have to see how the energy goes, because there's so many things to do, and there's hardly enough time.
Yes, yeah. So kind of as we kind of wrap up this podcast, what is something you want the audience to kind of leave with understanding from you?
Well, on what front? Because look, we've talked a little bit about in this podcast about identity, young South Asians, and language learning. I mean, from that point of view, I would say what I really want is find a way to learn a language.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever it takes, whether it's the technology that's out there now, it doesn't have to be Sanskrit, even though I highly recommend it. But it can be any language which you feel like you really want, and it'll be worth the labor.
Yeah.
In fact, out of the humanities, that particular skill acquisition is probably, more valuable than anything else that you can pick up, in my opinion. So that's something which I highly, highly encourage and recommend on that front. For those on another level, if you have an ambition and an inkling to do scholarship or academic work, which is in the humanities, social sciences, if it's obviously I would encourage you to pursue it if it's within your orbit, and within, whether it's within if it makes sense for you as a person. But even if it doesn't make sense to you to do it professionally, that there are many, many ways in which you can contribute by self-educating yourself, by getting into groups, by approaching other people to do like informal things. Like, now that we have technology, I mean, I teach about 2 or 3 Zoom classes, without, and it's not part of my job, but I just do it for my own pleasure and for the pleasure, where, I'm brought in and I teach things that I know.
Yeah.
And for people who can't obviously come to universities or study it professionally or are interested in it to do it that way. So I think that we should open up those spaces now and share with each other our knowledges that we picked up because of our own interests. And I think that's something which the technology is now allowing for. We just have to have the will to do it. And I think people should that we should organize those things more, especially for younger people who are still finding their way in this world, and have good role models to do that stuff.
Exactly. I feel like a lot of the content, a lot of the knowledge is kind of if you don't go to the university, you don't have access to it, or if you're not in this certain program, you're not gonna have access to it. So kind of expanding that and allowing people to immerse themselves is really important.
Very important, very
Yeah.
important, and also to sometimes it takes time, right? Like even if people don't come, it's important that that these things get built.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people may just poke around, may not be ready for it, but then
Yeah.
then one day the light bulb hits and there's nothing more important to them in the
Yeah.
world,
Gotcha. And then this was kind of from like a academic standpoint, but kind of in a more social standpoint and kind of being proud of their identity and culture. Do you have anything you want the audience to leave with?
Well, first of all, I think that there's a lot to be proud of, and I think it's very important that like once you educate yourself about the many of the things which have been left to us that we are
Yeah.
inheritors of from this cultural tradition, that there's a lot of things to, and because especially if you have languages,
Yeah.
any language, you have access that others don't.
Yeah.
And many people are wanting access. They're wanting access to these cultural traditions, and they're learning languages because of that, right? People who are not necessarily inheritors of those cultures and languages. So it would be a real waste for people who actually are within a tradition to not take that opportunity and that privilege of having access to these things and really getting into it deeply, so that it can not only shape their life for the better, but also allow them to share the good things from those things with other people. So I think that's the real, and that holds true for all cultures.
Yeah.
And that holds true for everybody. And that's one of the things, though. Unfortunately, it shouldn't be that another culture is more worthy of study than this one. This one is worth studying.
It is.
And worth really investing in.
Yeah.
In deep ways. And I think that's something which you have to, if there are people who are telling you otherwise, just be wary if people are telling you about things in a way that belie your own experience.
Yeah.
You should trust your own experience with things. Don't trust other people's words.
Gotcha.
Including mine.
I mean, I really appreciated learning. I mean, I'm definitely going to trust your opinion on this stuff.
Well, listen, I mean, look, I'm purposefully being very frank and upfront because, it's not like I have all the answers. I mean, experience doesn't give you answers. It just gives you some perspective. And I've just, I've seen a lot of things, much more than you've probably seen and been through stuff. But but intractable problems are intractable problems. They have to be solved with each individual and with each generation. They're not something which can be, there's no formula for it. That's the problem.
Yes, exactly. So, okay, gotcha. So thank you very much, Dr. Patel, for this entire talk. Is there any last minute or things that you want to mention or kind of tell to the audience as we kind of wrap it up?
Well, first of all, it was a real pleasure to speak with you. I mean, I'm really proud of what you're doing, and I wish you all the success in getting this organization off the ground and continuing it to grow, across the country and the world or whatever. The other thing is that, I always invite people who are interested in something that they have some curiosity. I mean, I may not be able to get back to them or anything, but I really feel like you should really reach out to people who, and I think everybody should be in control of their own learning on some level. Like, like really don't wait for it to come to you. Yeah. Go out and get it.
Yes.
So.
Awesome.
There it is.
Well said. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Patel, for your time. And any resources that you'd like me to link, you can just go ahead and send me an email.
Yeah, everything's available now. I don't think I need to link anything. I think everything is available to everybody.
Gotcha. Yes, I'll be sure to include everything in the description.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you.